There is a moment, usually somewhere around a birthday, that ends in a 0, when a quiet question starts knocking on the door of your mind. Is this it? Not because your life has gone wrong. Maybe your career was solid, maybe you raised good children, maybe the mortgage is paid off and the garage finally has room for the car. And yet, there it is, that question. Sitting at the kitchen table with you at 6 in the morning, when the house is still quiet. If you are 50, 60, 70 years old, and you have asked yourself that question, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not finished. You are not past your prime. You are standing at the edge of the only chapter of your life you get to write on purpose, with everything you've already learned. This is the story of a man who almost missed that chapter entirely. His name was Walter Grayson. And what he discovered at 63 didn't just change the rest of his life. It changed the way he understood every year that came before it. Stay with me. Because somewhere in Walter's story, I promise you, is a piece of your own. Walter Grayson spent 38 years at the same manufacturing plant outside Dayton, Ohio. He started on the floor at 22, and by the time he left, he was running the whole logistics division. He wore a tie every day, even when nobody required it anymore, because it made him feel like the job still mattered. And it did. When his retirement party came, there was cake in the break room, a card signed by 40 people, and a fishing rod someone had chipped in for. Walter smiled in every photo. He shook every hand. He said all the right things. And then he drove home, sat down in his recliner, and felt something he did not expect to feel. Grief, not sadness exactly. Grief. The specific kind that comes when something with a name and a shape and a purpose disappears from your life all at once. For the first few weeks, retirement felt like vacation. He slept in, he fixed the fence. He and his wife, Carol, took a trip to see their daughter in Charlotte. It was good. It was fine. But by month 3, Walter noticed something. He was waking up at 5:45 a.m. Out of habit, the same time he'd woken up for 38 years. And lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, with absolutely nowhere he needed to be. He told himself this was normal. Every retiree goes through an adjustment period, he thought. Give it time, but time didn't fix it. It made it worse. By month 6, Walter had started avoiding his old co-workers when he saw them at the grocery store. Not because he disliked them, because when they asked, "So what are you up to these days?" he didn't have an answer that felt like anything. "Oh, puttering around." He'd laugh it off. But it stung every time. Here is the part of Walter's story that so many people watching this will recognize, whether you're retired, recently widowed, an empty nester, or simply someone who built your whole identity around a role that has since changed shape. Walter had confused his job with his purpose. Asterisk. For 38 years, those two things had looked identical. The job gave him a reason to get up. It gave him people who depended on him. It gave him a way to say out loud who he was. I'm Walter Grayson. I run logistics at the plant. Simple, solid, true. But the job was never the purpose. The job was just the container the purpose had been living in. And when the container disappeared, Walter assumed the purpose had disappeared with it. He was wrong. But it would take him almost 2 years and one very uncomfortable conversation with his own grandson to find that out. So what was Walter's actual purpose, hiding underneath all those years of work? And why did it take a 9-year-old boy to help him see it? That's coming up. Walter's grandson Eli was 9 years old and had a habit of asking questions that landed like small bombs in the middle of a quiet room. They were sitting on the back porch one Sunday afternoon, Carol inside making dinner, the smell of pot roast drifting through the screen door. When Eli looked up from the model airplane he was gluing together and asked, "Grandpa, what do you do all day now?" Walter opened his mouth to give the usual answer. "Oh, this and that, but something about the directness of the question, a child's question, unfiltered by politeness, made him stop. "I don't really know, buddy," Walter admitted. And saying it out loud to a 9-year-old was somehow harder than admitting it to himself. Ellie didn't skip a beat. "Well, what did you like doing before you had the job?" Walter almost laughed. It had been so long since anyone asked him that question, including himself, that his mind actually went blank for a moment. Before the job. Before the job, he was 21 years old. But then it came back to him slowly, like a photograph developing. Before the job, Walter used to build things. Not for money, for the sheer satisfaction of it. He'd built a treehouse for his younger brother out of scrap lumber. He'd rebuilt a '58 Chevy engine in his father's garage just to see if he could. He used to sketch designs for furniture in a notebook he kept under his bed, half embarrassed by how much he enjoyed it. Somewhere across 4 decades of showing up, providing and being responsible, that 21-year-old had gotten buried. Not erased. Buried. Walter sat with that realization for a long moment. Eli had already gone back to his airplane, oblivious to the fact that he'd just cracked something open in his grandfather that had been sealed shut for years. Here is what I want you to notice about this moment, because it matters more than it seems. Walter didn't need a new purpose. He needed to remember an old one. This is one of the most under-talked about truths about life after 50, 60, 70. The things that once made you feel alive rarely disappear completely. They get buried under obligation, under providing for people, under the exhausting, honorable work of being responsible for 30 or 40 years straight. But buried is not the same as gone. Psychologists who study late life development call this generativity. The drive, especially strong after midlife, to create something, to contribute something, to leave something behind that outlasts you. It's not a midlife crisis. It's not a young person's ambition. It is a distinctly later life hunger, and it is one of the most powerful forces available to a human being who has already lived enough to know what actually matters. Walter didn't know any of that language. All he knew was that for the first time in almost 2 years, when he closed his eyes that night, his mind wasn't blank. It was already sketching. But knowing what you buried and actually digging it back up are two very different things. Walter was about to discover that the hardest part wasn't remembering his purpose. It was giving himself permission to want it again. The next morning, Walter did something he hadn't done in years. He went into the garage, cleared off his old workbench, and just stood there. And then the voice showed up, the one that shows up for almost everyone in this exact situation. You are 63 years old. What are you going to do? Start a woodworking hobby now. Who has time for that? What's the point? That voice is worth naming, because so many people watching this will recognize it instantly. It is not laziness. It is not lack of ambition. It is a very specific, very common belief that many of us absorb without ever examining it. The belief that reinvention has an age limit. We don't say it out loud, but we act like it's true. We assume that starting something new past a certain age is either embarrassing or pointless, that the window for becoming someone has already closed, and now the only job left is to maintain who we already are. Walter believed that for exactly 11 more days. And then Carol did something that changed the trajectory of his entire retirement. She didn't give him a pep talk. She didn't tell him to follow his dreams. She's not that kind of woman, and Walter wouldn't have believed it anyway. Instead, one evening, she set a small stack of cash on the kitchen table. Money she'd been quietly saving from her part-time work at the church office, and said, "That's enough for the wood and the tools you'll need for one project. Just one. Build something. I don't care what." Walter stared at the money like it was a dare. "Carol, I haven't built anything in 40 years. "I know," she said. so it'll probably be bad. Build it anyway. That single sentence, build it anyway, is worth pausing on, because it strips away the exact lie that keeps so many people frozen at this stage of life. The lie that you have to be good at something or guaranteed to succeed at it before you're allowed to try. Walter spent that whole week feeling almost ridiculous, ordering pine boards and relearning how to use a miter saw from videos his grandson helped him find. His first project was small, a simple step stool, the kind you'd give a grandchild to reach the kitchen counter. It came out crooked. One leg was a full quarter-inch shorter than the others. Walter looked at it sitting on his workbench, uneven and unglamorous, and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years: pride. Actual, physical pride in something his hands had made. He gave the crooked stool to Eli anyway. Eli loved it, not despite the flaw, but seemingly without even noticing it. He used it every time he came over, standing on it to reach the cookie jar Carol kept on top of the fridge. That crooked little stool did something in Walter that 38 years of a steady paycheck never quite managed to do at this stage of life. It made him feel useful again, not because someone was paying him to be useful, but because he had chosen on his own to make something exist that hadn't existed before. Asterisk. Here is the principle underneath Walter's crooked stool, and it applies whether your rediscovered purpose is woodworking, painting, mentoring, gardening, teaching, or something you haven't even thought of yet. You do not need permission from the world to begin again. You only need to stop waiting for permission from yourself. Asterisk. Nobody is coming to hand you a certificate that says you're allowed to want something new at 63. Nobody is going to tell you the window is still open. You have to decide that the same way Walter decided it. Standing in a garage with a stack of cash and a rusty miter saw, he barely remembered how to use Walter's next project wouldn't be a stool. It would be something that would eventually put him in front of 40 strangers, all of them younger than his own children. And none of it would have happened if he'd quit after that first crooked leg. Word travels fast in a small neighborhood. Within a few months, Walter had built a bookshelf for Carol, a set of Adirondack chairs for the back porch, and, almost as a joke, a small wooden chest for his daughter's wedding anniversary. His daughter posted a photo of that chest online. Nothing dramatic, just a proud daughter post. But a woman in her local community group saw it and asked if Walter took commissions. Walter almost said no out of pure reflex. I'm not a professional. I just do this for fun. But he remembered Carol's stack of cash and her flat, practical instruction: build it anyway. And instead he said, I can try. He built her a headboard. She paid him $300 for it. More money than Walter had made from anything in 2 years, and it wasn't really about the money at all. It was about the fact that a stranger, someone with no obligation to be kind to him, had looked at something Walter's own, 2 hands made, and decided it was worth paying for. Word kept spreading. A commission here, a commission there. Within a year, Walter had built a modest, unofficial little business. Nothing that would replace a pension, nothing he advertised. Just a retired logistics manager in Dayton, Ohio, quietly becoming known in his community as the guy who builds beautiful, honest furniture. But the part of this story that changed Walter the most wasn't the money or even the woodworking itself. It was what happened at the local community center 18 months after that crooked stool. The center ran a free workshop series for teenagers who'd been referred through a local mentorship program. Kids without much stability at home, looking for something to do with their hands and their time. They needed a volunteer to teach a 6-week basic woodworking class. Someone suggested Walter, but Walter almost said no to that too. What do I know about teaching kids? I ran a logistics floor, not a classroom. But he showed up to the first class anyway, because by then he'd learned something about himself. The fastest way to regret something was to talk himself out of it before he'd even tried. There were 11 teenagers in that first class. Most of them didn't want to be there. A few sat with their arms crossed the entire first session, clearly counting down the minutes. Walter didn't give a speech. He didn't try to inspire them. He simply picked up a piece of scrap wood, handed each of them one, and said, "Before we build anything complicated, I want you to just learn to make one clean cut. That's it. One clean cut. Everything after that gets easier." By week 3, something had shifted. One boy, a kid named Marcus, who hadn't said more than 5 words in the first 2 sessions, stayed 20 minutes after class ended, sanding down the edges of a small box he was building, refusing to leave until it was smooth enough to satisfy him. Walter watched him from across the room and felt something crack open in his chest. Not pride this time, recognition. He was watching a 21st century version of himself at that exact age. A young man who needed to build something with his own hands to believe he was capable of anything at all. This is the piece of Walter's story I most want you to sit with, wherever you are in your own life right now. The years you spent becoming who you are, the mistakes, the slow-earned skills, the quiet mastery of 38 years on a factory floor, or raising children, or running a household, or surviving something hard. None of it was wasted. It was never wasted. It was simply waiting for the moment you'd be ready to hand it to someone else. Purpose after 60 isn't usually about inventing something brand new out of thin air. It's about transferring everything you already carry, your skill, your patience, your hard-won judgment, into a place where it can keep doing good long after you're no longer clocking in anywhere. But Walter was about to face the one test that would determine whether any of this was real, or whether it would quietly fade the way so many good intentions do. It came in the form of a single bad afternoon that almost made him quit. 6 weeks into the mentorship program, Walter had a bad day, the kind of day every person watching this has had, at every age, in every pursuit worth having. Marcus didn't show up to class, neither did 2 other boys. The ones who did come were restless, distracted, uninterested. Walter's own hands ached with the beginnings of arthritis that made the finer cuts harder than they used to be. He drove home that evening feeling, for the first time since the crooked stool, like an old man playing at something that no longer belonged to him. He sat in his recliner. The same recliner he'd collapsed into after his retirement party 2 years and a lifetime ago, and said out loud to Carol, "Maybe I should just stop. I'm too old for this. These kids don't even want to be there." Carol didn't argue with him. She let him sit in it for a moment. And then she asked one simple question. Did Marcus want to be there in week 1? Walter thought about it. No. Does he want to be there now? Walter thought about the boy sanding his box for 20 minutes after class, refusing to leave until it satisfied him. Yeah, he does. So what changed? Walter didn't answer right away, but he knew. What changed was that Walter kept showing up, even on the days it didn't feel meaningful. Even on the days there was no applause, no proof, no guarantee that any of it mattered. Asterisk. This is the part of purpose that almost nobody talks about, because it isn't inspiring in the moment, it's just true. Purpose does not feel meaningful every single day. It feels meaningful in hindsight, built from 100 ordinary days you almost quit on. Walter went back the following week. Marcus came back too. It turned out his mother's car had broken down, nothing more dramatic than that. And 6 weeks later, at the small graduation ceremony the community center held for the program, Marcus stood up in front of the room holding the wooden box he'd built and said the only sentence he'd ever said publicly in that entire program. Mr. Grayson taught me that if you mess something up, you don't throw it away. You just sand it down and try again. Walter, 63 years old, retired logistics manager, builder of one deliberately crooked step stool, sat in the third row and cried in front of 11 teenagers and their families, and he did not care one bit who saw him. Walter Grayson is not a real person. He is a composite of 100 true stories. The retired teacher who started fostering rescue dogs at 68, the widow who took up painting at 71 and sold her first piece to a stranger at a farmer's market, the grandfather who spent 40 years driving a delivery truck and then spent his 70s driving neighbors to chemotherapy appointments because he still had two good hands on a steering wheel and nowhere better to be. But the shape of his story is true for more people than you'd think. And if you've made it this far, some part of it is probably true for you. Maybe you retired and felt that same quiet grief Walter felt. Maybe your children are grown and the house feels too big and too quiet. Maybe you've been telling yourself, for longer than you'd like to admit, that the window for becoming someone new has already closed. I want to leave you with the same three things Walter eventually learned, because none of them require youth, health, money, or permission from anyone else. First, your job was never your purpose. It was only ever the container. The purpose survived. It's still in there. Second, you do not need to be good at something before you're allowed to want it. Build the crooked stool. Build it anyway. Third, everything you spent decades learning, every skill, every scar, every hard-won piece of judgment was never wasted. It was waiting. It is still waiting. For someone younger, someone struggling, someone who needs exactly what only you can teach them, because you're the one who actually lived it. You are not on the back nine with nothing left to play for. You are standing at the one tee box where you finally get to choose the course yourself. So, what's your crooked stool going to be? If this found you at the right moment, tell me in the comments what you're building or rebuilding at this stage of your life. Someone else scrolling through these comments needs to read exactly that. And if you needed to hear that it's not too late, it isn't. Subscribe so the next story finds you when you need it.